Menscape The Podcast with Carl.J. Ashley, and proudly sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to the Menscape The Podcast edition for September. And we have back with us the one and only Mr. Richard Rocker, kindly sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic, which he owns. So thanks for sponsoring the show for the last 6 months, Richard.
My pleasure, Carl.
I hope you've got loads of business from it and that you're continuing to do the good work of helping people that are coming to you with whatever ailments and sicknesses they might have.
Well, we do our best anyways, helping people. Yeah. We're keeping steady. So that just tells me we're doing something well, because we don't really advertise, so to say. I think this is the only thing I'm really sponsoring. So to me, it's all word of mouth and
Organic.
If people didn't like what I was doing, they wouldn't be telling anybody else. So I take that as a good sign.
Yeah, it is. Word of mouth is king. I like that things can grow organically, and you have a nice sort of little space there as well with a nice vibe. There's a good energy about the place. You've got an infrared sauna. You've got is it a podiatrist, a foot specialist? You've got
we have a podiatrist here as well. Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about what services you offer for the benefit of the people.
Okay. Well, besides the things that I do, which I'll get into last, we have a number of people working their businesses out of our clinic. So we have a counselor psychotherapist here. We have an energy therapist, a podiatrist who looks after all things foot related. So some people may term it as a chiropodist, but from what I'm told, they're changing, they're getting rid of the chiropodist word, and it's all going to be podiatrist in the very near future. We have a reflexologist who primarily works with foot reflexology, but it's also expanding out into facial reflexology as well, which the two of those are combined. Now the thing is getting them together, getting somebody to rub your feet and your face at the same time, and then it's heaven, right?
I've been fond of reflexology for years. It's incredible, isn't it? That the body organs are mapped within the digits on the toes, and it's an incredible thing. I'd strongly recommend it to anyone that hasn't tried it before. Yeah.
And then we have a chartered physiotherapist here, a beauty therapist who is, since chatting with me, is changing to more kind of the more holistic, organic way of doing things, especially when dealing with women and the makeups and things like that, because that's a primary source of heavy metals and various chemicals and toxins. So I think one of a big thing that some people don't realize is that the skin is not this impenetrable fortress. It's actually a sponge. So what we put onto it gets into our systems. So when we look at autoimmune disease, which is ever increasing in this day and age, we see that women have 3 to 4 times as much autoimmune conditions than men do. So, obviously the question is, well, why is that? And my answer, it sounds funny, but I said, well, women are more toxic than men. And it's because for those things. So what are women doing that men generally aren't doing? Dyeing the hair, putting up on the makeups and the lipsticks and the lotions and potions, which a lot of them are, have a lot of chemicals and, like I said, heavy metals and things like that. And that accumulates into the system. And whenever you reach your kind of toxic low point, well, that's when things start to go wrong and disease starts to develop. When men start getting autoimmune issues, it's generally mainly the case they usually smoke and they drink too much or do drugs, stuff like that. That's the main thing. Or they'll work in a job where they might have chemical exposures, things like that. That's the main reason. Yeah.
What's interesting there? Sorry to cut across you. I remember reading a lot of information to the effect that you'd be very surprised, but products like deodorants and products like sun cream can actually, over time, have sort of cancer-causing attributes. And a lot of that was getting blamed on the sun. So in Australia, where people are slapping on sun lotion left, right, and center, and factor 50 or whatever, they were then developing melanomas and blaming the sun and saying the sun causes cancer. But if that was the case, then anyone living in any hot country would have it. And the correlation was actually to do with the chemicals in the products that people were, like you say, putting on, and then the skin was ingesting and ending up in the body. Now, I don't know how much of that is scaremongering or conspiracy or in actual fact reality and truth. But if you're a beauty person is using more holistic products, then that can only be a good thing, I would suggest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is a good thing. Yeah, and I mean the sunblocks are geez, they are loaded full of chemicals. It's really bad. And consider that when it's baking in the sun, it really it pushes it through the skin, but also heat can combine chemicals together, and it makes new chemicals out of that as well. It's the same process with smoking. So, there are, when they have the tobacco, they're sprayed with whatever they're spraying and with chemicals and antifungals and, bug stuff and so forth and so on. So the active combustion, lighting that up, combines chemicals together and it forms new compounds and new chemicals. So, the average cigarette, when you're smoking, you're exposing yourself to 2 to 4,000 different chemical compounds right off the bat there. So that's why it's highly associated with cancer.
Designed to kill you as slowly as possible to keep you alive for as long as possible, so you keep buying more and more. And they put the price up twice a year. Imagine going to the bank manager with that for a business model. Yeah, I'd like to borrow $500 million. I guarantee you I'll repay it to you within 3 years because I'll have made 10 billion, and I'm going to make cancer sticks that are going to kill people as slowly as possible, make them as addictive as possible, put the price up 2-3 times a year, even put pictures of diseased organs on the front of the cover of the packets, and people are still going to buy them.
They do, yeah.
Lend me the $500 million now. He'd look at you and say, you're crazy. This is what happens, though. It's a scam, the biggest scam ever. Mind you, I was smoking for 25 years till I woke up to it. It's not so easy to get off them.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. And it can be addictive. Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. But yeah, I like the warnings on the packages. I have one cut out here from one of my clients. It says here, smoking can cause a slow and painful death, and people still buy them.
Yeah, thanks for the warning, but I could murder a fucking cigarette. So, yeah, the logic doesn't really apply when we have I wouldn't necessarily go down the path of the addictions, but your man, Dr. Gabor Mate, he's a particularly interesting character. I've got one of his books and I've watched a lot of his online lectures, and he talks about the underlying reasons for the addictions. The problem isn't the substance itself, so whether it's chocolate, heroin, coffee, sex, tobacco, whatever it is you're hung up on is not the issue. It's the underlying issue that you turn to that to self-medicate, to soothe from feelings usually caused by lack of self-love, childhood trauma, things not necessarily that happened to you, but the way that you processed how they happened. Your in-house psychologist or psychotherapist would probably have some interesting things to say on Gabor.
Yeah, she would, and part of what I do is psychotherapy as well, and I've always said no matter what issue somebody comes in for, if we're going to boil it down and get it down to the brass tacks, it always comes down to self-esteem. Always, 100% of the time, whatever issue you're having, it's coming down to some sort of warped or lack of self-esteem, and when we work with people with that, then it gets better and better. But I think where Gabor Mate excels in is obviously the trauma aspects of things, and we're seeing this coming out more and more these days. People are not only more aware of it, but it seems to be coming out more. So I suppose, I don't know, is there something changing with the vibrations and frequencies that are maybe unraveling these things within our DNA? I don't know.
Truth vibrations, yeah.
Yeah, truth vibrations, that comes up that a lot, but I would suspect that is, and maybe hence the popularity of like plant medicines and plant medicine retreats, where if you go to a proper retreat with proper facilitators that are trained in trauma release and dealing with that, you can get phenomenal results. I've seen them firsthand, how it can help people. So it's a very interesting topic for sure.
And isn't it curious that alcohol and tobacco are made legal, and something like mushrooms that grow in the ground naturally are made illegal? Like how does that even work?
Yeah, well, you know what? The Mother Earth, I always say, it always provides us what we need, and if it's growing in the ground, it probably can't be too bad, long as it's used in the right way. With the right intention, I think is the big thing. Even with plant medicines, if you use them with the right intention and the right space, so forth, they can have very powerful effects. But you can also go outside of it and use it, and you could have a disastrous effect with it as well.
Or would you go as far as to say that if the government outlaws things like cannabis and the magic mushrooms and makes them illegal, then would that be a kind of a sort of an indication that there may be the things that we need or should go looking for, and the things like alcohol and tobacco that have long-term devastating effects that they make legal because the government obviously profits a lot from them? Like, are we living in a society where everything's subverted to the point that you do the opposite of what the government is recommending, or the mainstream media is recommending? Are we in that sort of end game?
It seems that way. I mean, it's yeah, it definitely seems that way. I mean, I think everything has uses to it, and okay, cannabis. We know it has a lot of medicinal benefits. It's, but there's many ways to take it. When we say, well, it can help with various illnesses and diseases, and so forth.
Pain
Yeah,
relief.
it might not necessarily be smoking it, so maybe it needs to be ingested in some form or in a concentrated form that it has its benefits. I think smoking is just basically, with cannabis, from my knowledge, okay, people that have poor appetites, it could help that to make them eat more. Psychologically, it can help a person calm down and relax, which is good. But if you're using it to get away from your problems and dealing with your emotions and things like that, then it's just like anything else. It's like any other kind of drug or alcohol where you're medicating your problems away. But I think if it's used with the right intention, maybe I think a lot of yogis and stuff might use it, but it's usually used in conjunction with meditations, and attaining higher thought during meditations. Yeah, it probably has some benefits. Alcohol, can't really say that there's really any benefits to drinking alcohol, because there really isn't. However, if you use a base alcohol to extract the power from different herbs and nutrients like that, then yeah, you could have something that's beneficial from that. Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for alcohol at certain times during your life. I have to defend. Man has been brewing things since the dawn of time. Usually the monks, actually, if you look at the Belgian beers, they were all brewed in the abbeys by the monks and the abbots. And when you look at some of the finest wines, they're probably procured by the religious guys at the time. And many, they say alcohol is a great thing for ugly people to get laid. But aside from the obvious benefits of alcohol, I mean, to tie in what you're saying with the plant medicine and the psychotherapy, I had an experience myself a few years ago, actually, after I've been through a difficult time with sort of marriage breakdown, death of a parent, bereavement, isolation, loneliness, abandonment. And I did some of the microdosing. And what actually took place is difficult to relate. It's quite a personal thing as well. But I effectively made a commitment to my own hurt inner child to reparent that inner child and walk slowly and gently through whatever was coming up. And it was like a part of myself that I was encouraging to be nurtured again, but through my actions and decisions as a man, as a parent now. And this experience was facilitated through very, very small dose of the mushrooms. And I wouldn't go recommending it willy-nilly, but if you have some trauma and it is an alternative to what's out there, it might be worth exploring. Especially if, like, I'd been attending workshops on family constellations, and the stuff with the multi-generational family trauma had been coming up quite a good bit. And if you don't resolve it, or you don't look towards identifying what the underlying issues are to look to resolve them, you're destined to effectively repeat them. So your father's behavior patterns, or your father's energies, or your father's failures, if you don't bring it into conscious awareness and deal with it, you're almost destined to repeat it. And maybe that comes through in the DNA or what. I can't explain the transmission of energy, but that was hugely beneficial, hugely healing. Yeah.
Well, that generational traumas and behaviors and attitudes, it's already written into the DNA, just like physical attributes. So, when you have your children and you look at them and they go, oh, they have the same nose or the same feet or
Hopefully,
toes,
anyway.
or whatever, But then when you look at your child growing up and you see them do things or respond in certain ways, and you go, well, I never taught them that, but that's definitely in my line. Then you start really realizing that, yeah, some things are in the blood or in the DNA, so to say. So I do believe that what you don't work out personally, that your children will have to deal with or are born with and stuff. So unfortunately, I became aware of that in my life, and there are a lot of things that I didn't want passing on to my son. So I did a lot of work. I'm still doing work. I think it's a constant process where we're doing that. But
Absolutely.
I can see I can see changes already with my son. And I also believe the work that I have done and things that have come up in my line, I can see it also affecting those in my family that are still alive. And I can see changes in them that I never thought I would see. And then all of a sudden we're having conversations that we never did. And, tears and emotions are coming up. So, and, I had something recently where, without getting specific, there was one family member I never thought I would be having a conversation with, and it happened, and we're chatting for hours on end, and the other person I could see in the background on the video just going, "What's going on?" Yeah. So it's fascinating. It really is. But I think we're in the day and age where the frequencies and vibrations are changing so much, and they're getting faster and higher. And as you said before, some people would term that as truth vibrations, because the high vibrations are of a higher light type of source, and it really shines on the things that aren't in that frequency. So when we think that things are getting worse in this world and that evil is at its all-time high, it's always been there. It's just being highlighted more. I think people are more aware of it, and it's coming to the forefront, which is good. That means when it highlights, these things will be exposed, and then hopefully they'll be dealt with, and then we start transforming not only ourselves but ultimately the world. And hopefully we'll have a much better place to be in and experience life with one another. Yeah.
There seems to be, very much a microcosm and a macrocosm with any transformational personal work that you do with what you can see at society at large. There's a lot of evidence to suggest from, again, research I've done myself, both online and through books and what have you, that we're living in a simulation, and we actually create the reality that we want to experience, either consciously or subconsciously. And we're maybe living in a time where you've got a dualism or a dichotomy, where if you believe the world's a bad place full of bad people, you're going to experience things to reinforce that. And if you believe the world is a good place full of good people, naturally your outlook is going to define what you see. And so the reality of what we're experiencing in this 3D world can be very much a vibrational match to our thoughts and our ideas and what we create internally through our consciousness. And I think science is catching up with ancient mystical knowledge in this respect. And was it Tesla that said, once the scientists start studying the non-physical phenomena, for example, your cosmic rays, and unseen sort of metaphysical, like there's knowledge about radio waves and infrared waves and microwaves and things that we can't see. But then there's a whole other world as well, that where there's a spiritual realm that connects us to this 3D reality. And as science is catching up with the ancient mystical knowledge, more and more truth is coming up and to the fore, and people can either choose to embrace it or ignore it. If it doesn't fit their preconceived notions, it might make them feel uncomfortable, so they reject it or they're in denial. And for those people that are on a path of pursuing the truth and energetically matching those vibrations of what's coming up, then more and more will come up to match. And so we could be living in very much a kind of a twin state, a paradigm where, people are experiencing the same world in different ways through their own way of processing the thoughts and expectations of that reality. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. You're probably familiar with Joe Dispenza, right?
I was just thinking of him right now, so you took the words out of my mouth. But yeah, he's Joe. Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's great, and I think he explains it in a very interesting way that's easy to comprehend. And unless he gets off into the quantum side of things, it can get confusing for people a bit. But he is a great person for people that have any interest in the power of the mind and how your thoughts create reality, and what you can do and how simple it is actually to make those changes. Definitely a very good resource to follow. I'm very lucky to have Dr. Dispenza as one of my instructors in my doctorate training right now. So I'm actually in his course right now dealing with neuroplasticity. So it's
excellent.
It's great to have him as one of my teachers as well, because I really have been following his stuff over the years, and I think I have the majority of his books as well. So great resource. Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about the other practitioners in the clinic and what services they offer. Maybe speak a bit about what you offer and typically how you can help potential clients as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's hard to put under one title exactly what I do, but I think the best thing is what I'm actually getting my doctorate in, which is integrative and natural medicine. Basically, I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner. I'm a certified blood chemistry analyst. So as a blood chemistry analyst, what I do is I take bloods. So I'm a certified phlebotomist. So I take bloods. I have my own profiles that I test people with. I kind of figured out very early that the tests that people were getting from their primary physicians might not necessarily be complete tests as I would like to see as kind of a clinician or a blood chemistry analyst. Most people, when they get a blood test, they're probably, if they're getting a so-called full blood test, maybe 20 markers top. I haven't really seen too many more than that. To me, this is like doing a jigsaw puzzle with only 20% of the pieces. It's not a complete picture, and then I'm just guessing at what's going on. So if I'm trying to help somebody, I need to have a bigger picture of what's going on, which requires more blood markers, a more expanded view of that and how they work and relate with one another. Then you can start putting together where deficiencies are, where the dysfunctions lie, and then you can put two and two together and help the person out. So most of my blood tests will generally be somewhere around 80, 90 blood markers. I do reports up for people. I sit down with them and explain exactly what's going on, because the majority of the people, they don't know. They don't know what their blood markers mean. So you need somebody that sits down to educate them and explain that. And I think this is what's lacking in this day and age, is a lot of people, they're going to their primary physicians and oh yeah, your test is fine and is okay, and that's what they're left with, So if you sit down and discuss things, people, why things aren't functioning, why they're not in the optimal zones, that really helps people. And talking about optimal zones, there seems to be a little confusion with that, because when you get your blood test and they have the reference ranges that are listed on there, mistakenly, we often think that these are healthy optimal ranges. It doesn't say healthy range on there, it says reference range. So the way that the labs work it is that about every 6 months, they take approximately 10,000 people or patients going through the labs. They take the average of those results and they go, well, this is the reference range. This is why reference ranges often change, because people's results are changing. Now, when I look at that as a blood chemistry analyst, I'm going, well, okay, 10,000 people, probably 8,000 of those people are sick to begin with. That's why they're getting their blood test. And then the other ones are maybe just trying to maintain or doing a retest. So I don't think a lot of those are accurate. So when we do tests, we base it on optimal ranges. We show people what the difference between reference and optimal ranges are, and work to get the people in there by making lifestyle and dietary adjustments. So that was a long answer to that one. But outside of
the personal stuff, right, that we can take care of ourselves would include exercise and diet and what have you. But not forgetting, we've just come out the back end in the last 2 years of possibly the biggest psychological operation known to man, this so-called pandemic, where people were encouraged to take part in experimental injections, which the consequences of which hadn't been fully determined, hadn't been fully tested, and there was a lack of clarity in sort of putting that out to the public. Contrarily, it was more the case that people were corralled and shamed into queuing up to take part in this process. What have you seen from people in terms of after effects from having taken part in these experiments, other than sort of diet and routine?
Well, there's no doubt that there's been a lot of adverse reactions occurring. I can't say that everybody has had them, but there are definitely a lot of people that have had adverse reactions. So, some of it, people go, well, when I've had my shot, I definitely didn't feel well after. I felt I had heart palpitations. I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was dying. I was sweating and stuff like that.
Right.
Some people, they don't seem to have recovered after their shots, in terms of energy, just feeling fatigued, a lot of brain fog. We're seeing a lot of that occurring. Some people, they seem to have a little bit of breathing issues. And I think they, the medical establishment will go, well, this is long COVID or that, which is okay. Maybe if somebody got COVID, if that's your belief in it, maybe so. But I think there seems to be information coming out now, especially with the Pfizer document dumps that have been court ordered to come out, which would highlight areas of concern, which it seems that there was already knowledge that these things might have adverse reactions. We know that when it comes to the animal studies, that the animals didn't fare very well with that. So when we look at
these were being pushed onto pregnant women and children as well. Like, are we living in a sci-fi movie or like a Bond movie where there's a villain stroking a cat and saying, "Oh, make sure everyone takes one of these, and the world will be mine." Ha 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 ha. Is there like some evil mastermind? I mean, is this the domain of conspiracy nut like what the hell's going on? How could it be that the medical services and the resources of the institutions that we trust as people could be so caught up in something so obviously detrimental to human health?
Yeah. Well, there's
Not
there's
incompetence, surely.
yeah. Well, there's two things. There's two doctors I've spoken to who I probably would highlight what they have said. One fellow, he's very well known, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and he came up with two things. He goes, well, either people are incredibly stupid at top who are doing these things, or he goes, there's something very sinister going on, or maybe a combination
Maybe
of
both.
the two.
Yeah.
And then the other person whose opinion I probably would value a lot is Dr. Robert Malone, because he's actually the inventor of the mRNA technology, who, since he had an opinion which went against the mainstream narrative, has since been censored, which should strike concerning for a lot of people, because here's the guy that developed it, and he said, listen, it didn't fare very well with the animal trials, and in no way should it be put into a human body. I think I would be listening a lot to that, and I definitely did. And I said, well, geez, we need to do a little bit more research with this. And I had the privilege to meet with him about a month ago here in Ireland.
Okay.
And it was interesting, him bringing forth the research from that. And unfortunately, a lot of it is negative news for people that have taken it. But I can only speak in my clinical experience. So from what I'm seeing here at the clinic, yes, the fatigue is a huge thing. It seems that there's an increased cancer risk associated with that. So anybody can look up mRNA technology, and they can do the research on that, and they can see that there is an elevated cancer risk associated with that. And it seems in the last 2 years, there has been a huge raise in cancer cases. There is some concern that there might be some immune dysfunction occurring with the shots, that it might actually be disabling the immune system.
That was my next question. There seems to be, in the development of this particular, whatever the chemical composition is, there seems to be an element of it that actually deliberately targets the human immune system and disables it from recognizing future examples of particular strains of viruses. I mean, the consequences of that are like, again, Bond villain, Yeah, so there seems to be plenty enough evidence to suggest that there's autoimmune deficiency problems specifically targeted to people's ability to cope with diseases and viruses, Richard.
Yeah, it seems that way, because there seems to be some kind of immune dysfunctioning occurring with it. Again, not in everybody. I don't know what the differences are. Is it the number of shots people have had? Is it people's own genetics? I suppose we can also look at it that it's also a drug trial, so we're not actually sure, is everybody getting a full strength shot, or maybe a half shot? Maybe there are saline shots. I don't know. I suppose nobody knows except whoever has the barcodes on it and whoever is monitoring the thing. So we'd have to look at that.
Absolutely incredible. It is literally like we're living in the maddest sci-fi movie, or even a spiritual war, where you've got the forces of evil seemingly determined to eradicate the human population, and then the forces of good striving to get the truth out there to people so as not to endanger themselves. And somewhere in between, there's guys like yourself picking up the pieces, with people coming in just thinking that they did what was the right thing and what was the best thing because they happened to believe what they were told. And all of a sudden you're showing them blood results and saying, you're going to need some lifestyle changes here. And, it's so, like, it's hugely traumatic. It's like akin to, if you look at the relationship between a narcissist and an empath, where there's gaslighting and all these other sort of psychological phenomena that can be identified, but basically being perpetrated by the multinationals and the government on the people? Or is there something behind this that's actually beneficial for mankind that we're just not aware of?
Well, I can't see it being beneficial in my experience, but
Seems like a stretch, doesn't it?
it's not my place to tell people whether to get vaccinated or not either. To each their own. But
What if there was, I'm going to throw something wacky out here there for you now. What if there was a percentage of the human race or the human population that were actually non-human and they were masquerading as being humans, and this was the way to weed them out?
I suppose anything is possible. Nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing surprises me anymore these days.
One of the whistleblowers from the was it the Montauk Project, or one of the truth summits they had in the States, where, you know, where all the pilots come in from the US Navy and Area 51, and they spend 2 or 3 days speaking. There's a name for these summits. One maintained that there was 52 different species of extraterrestrials, or what you might call aliens, or from your Zeta Reticuli through to your reptilians, through to your, you know, is it Pleiadians and blue avians and all that. And so if they can masquerade, if they're coming from the fourth dimension, and they can masquerade a fully human appearance and visage, and you can't tell the difference between, you know, Ethel and Mavis and John Smith and Paddy McGuinness, between, you know, what a great way to weed out the wheat from the chaff, to see who's actually a bona fide human and who's not, by getting them to take these injections. But I can't see it. It seems like a ridiculous stretch.
It seems that way, you know. I mean, if there are other beings out there, well, I think we'd be naive to say not to think that there wouldn't be something out there. And then you can even argue, well, is there actually an out there? And that goes down a whole other rabbit hole. You know,
Yeah.
is there an outer space? Do we live on a round planet? Do we live on a flat planet? do we live in a torus field? Is there an inner Earth? So forth and so on.
That's
we
interesting.
hear all
that I'm definitely happy to chat about that. But before I get into that, if you're looking at the phenomenon of dealing with multiple sort of forms of life here, I don't think that's too much of a stretch for people. But when you're dealing with the phenomenon of, say, people like myself, that from day one, no mask, no jab, no test even, not buying any of this. And there's a big tribe of us out there. We might be in the minority in the whole scheme of things, but we might be considered authentic, or we might be considered as trusting our intuition. And that intuition might come from, you might say, your divine manifestation here. And so that can't be an accident, can it? Or is it just that we're stupidly awkward and stubborn and cynical and skeptical of the mainstream narrative? Or is there actually a kind of a tribe spiritually of beings here on Earth that are meant to sort of, in some way, save humanity from this, what can only be described as an Armageddon type scenario?
I think there might be, you know. I think some people are just far more tuned in than other people. And again, the more you self-sabotage yourself with behaviors that aren't good for your physical body, it's going to affect your other bodies as well. So again, you go back to the smoking and the drinking and the chemicals and so forth and so on. They're not high vibrational acts, and neither do they lead to good health. You know, so those are all things that I would look at the clinic as well. You know, adjusting the lifestyle, the dietary habits of people, and not just looking at a physical level, but what's going on with a person emotionally, psychologically, and even arguably spiritually as well, which I stress is not based on religion. It's a whole different pond there, which sometimes people confuse there. And so I think, and I think this is coming out more because, as we said earlier, when frequencies and vibrations increase, then we go into more of those higher bodies of consciousness where those things resonate at. And I think people that are more tuned into there, they see things, they feel things that maybe others don't. So
Or
you
even
become more
that
aware.
the same person a few years ago didn't.
Yeah, you become more aware. You have more of a gut feeling, and you trust that more. You trust more of what's in your stomach and less of what's
Yeah,
what's in here.
we're evolving all the time, and huge personal transformation does happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
you alluded to briefly there. I touched on the flat Earth, globe Earth phenomenon. Again, this is something that's maybe considered a bit taboo, but when I started researching this, it became quickly obvious that neither me nor you nor any most Tom, Dick, or Harry has been to outer space and actually looked back and said, "Oh, there's the globe Earth." Right. So who has supposedly done that? And then you look at the Apollo missions and the various things put out by NASA pertaining to maintaining this version of events. And I'm looking at this, and there's massive holes in all of it. Whether it's like, you know, a guy supposedly in a zero gravity tank in a spaceship, and then there's bubbles coming up behind his back. He's obviously underwater, and they've green screened it to make it look like he's in a space. Like what? Again, are we living in a sci-fi movie or what? Who on earth would want to maintain the myth or the impression that we are on this little ball hurtling around at thousands of miles an hour, hurtling through space around a sun or a star in a galaxy or what have you, to cause the illusion that our existence is mere happenstance and not by the divine, and be able to maintain that so successfully that every child that goes to primary school pretty much everywhere in the world, the first thing they do is they pick up the globe, or they see the globe, and they're taught, well, that's where you live, sunshine. You know, how could, like, of all the conspiracies from JFK through to the Titanic, 9/11 and what have you, this has to be the biggest of all. This is the mother of all conspiracies. We've all been reared to think we're on a globe and we're inside either a dome on a flat earth with four corners of the earth, like a lot of ancient literature used to speak of. Again, trusting your own intuition with the information that you come across, and that guiding you to more information. You mentioned inner earth as well. Have you been to outer space or in the inner earth, Richard?
Yeah. Maybe when I was younger, when I did things I shouldn't have, but no. But it's an interesting topic, and I can't say one thing one way or another. But it's, when you look at the whole globe theory, it does seem a little. It doesn't seem feasible when you think about this spinning ball going through space and stuff like that. But also, a flat disk in space doesn't make sense either. So I think there's something in between. I like looking at a lot of old maps and old societies and things, and see what they put out there. And we all know there was a point when they debated flat Earth and round Earth and so forth and so on. Then you always think, well, what if the flat thing was actually how it was, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But when you look at a lot of these old maps and the depictions of the universe, you don't really see anything that's out there. You kind of see dome or firmament type structures, where actually the moon, the sun, the planets, the stars are within this. They're kind of within this dome,
It
so to
makes
say.
sense.
So
If you track the sun and the moon, it makes sense that they'd be within some kind of dome, or that the stars would be outside of it. But firmament, does that mean that there's like water above, and that explains why we see blue in the sky?
Yeah, well, that would make sense because that'd be water. And when you consider that the space in between things is mainly plasma,
Hmm.
whether that's in our bodies, whether that's in outer space, they're just starting to realize now that they said space was a nothingness, dark matter and this and that, but now they're
It's not
starting to
empty,
talk.
right?
They're talking about that it's actually could be that's empty space could actually be plasma. So then when you think about that, and that's actually plasma is actually a physical thing. It's so when we look at because I deal with blood, when we look at plasma, when I centrifuge somebody's blood down and we're taking the plasma out, we're separating the fluid from the red blood cells, right? So so when I hear that, then I'm going, well, maybe the outer space is water. Maybe we're in some kind of bubble. And then when you when you look at spaceships go up and you look at what comes out from when they get high up, it kind of looks like almost like a boat going through water. It doesn't it? It's really interesting when you look at that. So if that was empty space, they wouldn't look like that, but it does kind of look like it's in water. If nobody's looked at that, look at it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think it's an interesting concept to consider.
And the other sort of flag, if you like, is if people are talking about this and getting deplatformed and censored by your tech sort of overlords like the LinkedIn and Facebook and Google, maybe even YT, I'm not sure where it ends, but like with the so-called pandemic, if people speaking the truth are being told that their opinions don't meet with community policies or community standards or community guidelines or some vague sort of bullshittery that they've come up with to justify censoring people, that would usually be an indicator that there's something more to look at here. Yeah, no?
It would seem that way. I mean, if the opinion that you're putting out there isn't causing harm to anybody, then what's the issue? We're all entitled to our opinion about things, and then it's up to the individual to be able to prove that point or bring out the evidence of that. So why not have somebody give their opinion about things? But it is an interesting concept, and if it indeed is a scam, and NASA is using whatever CGI to manipulate things, which we have found on occasions, which it has. When you found certain things that we thought were in the space station and they weren't, and you realize there was a green screen there, but those videos tend to disappear very quickly. Then you start wondering, well, if they lied about that, what else are they lying about? Is that little rover on Mars just a remote
Tunisia,
desert
mate.
somewhere with a red screen on it? We don't really know, do we? And if we can't control one thing on one side of our planet, are we expecting that we can control something that's apparently millions of miles away, a little robot with a remote control? I don't know.
Yeah, there's lots of room for doubt and skepticism, and you'd think that would be encouraged by the science community, but unfortunately, what's happened with science is that the organizations and institutions and bodies that award the funding for the research to happen tend to be controlled by the very same people who benefit from the narrative that's being pushed. And when I think back to as a fresh-faced student of 19 years of age, attending Leeds University for my degree in psychology and philosophy, now we came across a module called the Development of European Science. And they taught us that Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler were these great guys, and they looked out of a telescope, they looked up at the stars, and they formulated this theory of the orbs in space and looking at the planets and concluding that we're the same. And they were vilified and persecuted by the religions of the time because apparently that spoke out against the establishment narrative in much the same way that you might speak of a firmament as being sort of described in the book of Genesis. The Bible's been heavily edited by sort of the winners in history, right? The certain gospels have gone missing, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch, and what have you. There isn't the freedom of information that we might think, and you only have to go to a Wikipedia page online to see that. Things are ridiculously edited to suit some agenda or some narrative. So when you look at the ancient maps of the world and you see concentric circles going inwards with an ice wall around them, it's like looking at a computer game I used to play when I was a kid, where there was an ice wall around everywhere, or even the world described in fictionalized tales of the likes of Tolkien, or in more recent times, George R.R. Martin. And is it too far a stretch to acknowledge that what we've been taught was fiction in these sci-fi movies was more based on the truth? And so we're rejecting the truth as fiction, and even when the truth is then being told, we don't hear it because we've been programmed to see it as fiction. So if you saw pictures of the Antarctic for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, span a huge ice wall spanning a massive length, and you think that we're in a flat domain, obviously, because the horizon's flat, we don't experience being on a spherical domain, and that we're surrounded by an ice wall. This sounds like something straight bang out of fiction, but why couldn't it be true?
Yeah,
and in the summer,
really,
that ice wall melts, and you can actually pass through a certain part of Antarctica, which is a frozen wall, circular in circumference. So if there's a part of it melts, and you wouldn't want anyone to find out, wouldn't you create an international peace treaty to set planes and tanks and everything to destroy anyone coming anywhere near to find out what's actually happening there? And you look at Operation Paperclip and stuff and see that's exactly what's happened.
Well, yeah, it is, and that's and that's no conspiracy, because we know that there is an international treaty down there. We do know that there is a heavy military presence down there. So if it's supposed to be this vast barren thing where life can't survive, then why would we need that there? So it should make people very suspicious, indeed. Yeah, I always found that very interesting. And there's some other questions that maybe I have that other people wouldn't maybe could dispel. I don't know, like little things that I look at. Well, if it goes colder when we go north, why doesn't it go colder when we go south? Aren't we going to a colder region as well? Little things like that. Maybe there's an explanation. I don't know.
The thing that really piqued my interest there, like, those little things that you're saying, was the flight paths. So if we were on a globe, right, and you take your globe, and let's say you're in South Africa, yeah, and then you want to fly to South America, or you want to fly to somewhere else on the southern hemisphere, on a globe, it'd make sense just to go across from one to the other. But all the flight paths, the flights go back up into Europe to somewhere like Amsterdam or Berlin or London, and then back to wherever, South America or South Africa. But when you look at this on a flat Earth map, it's just a halfway stopping station. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I found that was, hang on a minute, this, and you run the risk of ridicule if you bring this up with people. You run the risk of being regarded as an absolute looper if you actually present evidence like the flight paths and say, well, look, how can this be? People would just say, oh, you're fucking crazy. They're not actually going to say, oh, actually, yeah. Why does every flight from the southern hemisphere then have to come back up through Europe rather than if we're on a globe? It doesn't make any sense.
Or why can't we go up in the air and just wait until the Earth comes to where we need it? Unless that whole atmosphere moves with it, I don't know. I'm not a physicist in that regard, so I don't know. But these are questions that should be discussed, and I think, yeah, we're still just like with the medical establishment, we're trusting in an organization that says, well, we've been here, we've been to outer space, so that's how it is. But we don't actually really know. We're just taking the word of a couple people that have actually apparently been there, that that's how it is. And even when we look at when you look at the footage of the moon landing, I mean, that's quite obvious, so full of holes that didn't happen. And I think most people, if they really take a look at that, you're kind of going, yeah, that's there's too many questions and variables there that can't be true, you know.
And yet people in our parents' generation in the 60s or in the 70s that were watching this on telly at the time, they were gobsmacked. Yeah, man's landed on the moon. You know, it was theatre. There's a reason why Hollywood has a budget of billions, and there's a reason why NASA has a budget of billions.
Well, who was it? Was it Stanley Kubrick that had a filming of that, or am I gonna have the wrong person?
They said Kubrick's wife, after he died, she confessed that he'd taken part in filming the moon landings and that he was sworn to secrecy whilst he was alive, but they gave him whatever he wanted. Young girls, you know, but whatever you want there, just shut the fuck up and keep your mouth shut. And this came out afterwards, you know. It was all
you know what?
studio, you know, and there's like a shadow, you know. So if you're on the moon and there's like a shadow, and the Earth's behind, I mean, it's just so obviously like, you know. I mean, come on. I mean, but in the days when there was 2-3 channels on the TV and the radio and the newspapers controlled public opinion, they could pretty much say anything and get away with it, and people have believed it.
And then always the question I have is, well, who filmed that?
Who was on the moon already? Yeah.
If that guy was the first man on the moon, then wouldn't the camera guy be the first man on the moon? Because the camera's not anywhere near the vehicle, so they didn't have an automated camera. So, and then you look at the spaceship itself, and you're kind of going, yeah, that doesn't look very sturdy. And is all that equipment going to fit in? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem to add up to me. And I mean, so if the point is if we're finding that there are falsehoods there, then we have to question everything else. And if they would be lying about that, then this is the greatest deception of all time. Because most people, they will believe lock, stock, and barrel, you know, the outer space and the universe and millions of miles. But I suppose we should ask ourselves the question, well, what if it isn't like that? It changes everything. And if that's a lie and they can fool you about that, then everything else.
There's nothing else, is there, that they have lied about?
Is anything that we know really, really true? And I think this is what's all being uncovered in this day and age now with, like we said before, frequencies, truth vibrations coming out. Even in the world of archaeology alone, the amount of findings that contradict what the main narrative is astounding. And if you look at any of those type of things, you'll quickly go, well, some things just simply don't add up here. History doesn't add up to what we're being told. You know, it would also suggest that, you know, we think we're the most advanced society that's ever been. According to archaeology, that probably isn't true, you know. And if that's the case, why are we being dumbed down so that all these things aren't brought to the forth? So again, then it needs to mean somebody's controlling it. Somebody is controlling us, and we're essentially prisoners in this holographic type reality.
Yeah, the implications are quite scary. When you were a kid and you watched a movie and something happened that you knew couldn't actually happen, but you went along with it anyway, they coined the phrase the willing suspension of disbelief. So you accept that happened, even though you know it couldn't have happened. And it seems that this willing suspension of disbelief has been applied to a lot of the things we've been expected to believe, that we've been reared in the schools and taught to believe. The idea that we're at the cutting edge of technology and that man was some Neanderthal in a cave beating his chest is phenomenally inaccurate. I mean, I couldn't buy this for a moment, really. I mean, there's evolutionary biology, sure, and there's different sort of species, but the myth that we somehow evolved from apes, and that there's just this missing link that they'll find in the future. Again, it's the willing suspension of disbelief. It's not actual scientific practice to accept that. And whilst there may be lots of evidence in the natural world for evolution, as in the evolution of certain species where they evolve to adapt to their environment, there's zero evidence for it in the evolution of Homo sapiens sapiens from, for example, previous historical versions of Homo erectus or Cro-Magnon. And when you study the evolution of humanity according to the science books and the textbooks, there's huge holes. But when you look at the archaeology, it's very plain to see that there has been a very advanced civilization, and it's been global. In other words, things in Japan, South America, something linking all parts or all four corners of the earth, if you like. Did you come across the phenomenon of Ooparts?
Of which, sorry?
They were called Ooparts.
Ooparts. I don't think so.
So this coin was phased. I'm just going to stick on a screen share and see, can I do that? Show it to you. The Ooparts. I don't know if you see that there. They were so-called Ooparts, as in out of order objects.
Oh, okay.
They found things that didn't actually fit in with the narrative.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of these things. I just didn't know that's what they were called. Yeah, okay.
So you've got, like, if you look at that looks like a PlayStation control, right? Or a Nintendo controls.
Yeah, well, that one could be manufactured. I'm not sure about that. I don't quite believe that one there. Yeah.
This one here, where they're depicting in caves,
Yes,
helicopters and spaceships.
yeah.
Yeah, look, we're running out of time, but there you go. The Ooparts, the objects that they just can't seem to explain.
Yeah, there's a good book. I think I might have mentioned it last time we spoke, but there's a good book called Forbidden Archaeology. That would be a good one if anybody has any interest in that. Look up that book, and you'll definitely see a lot of things that don't fit the mainstream narrative of our timelines, and that should really poke a lot of questions in your head. It kind of seems to me through things that there seems to be about every 200-300 years, there seems to be a kind of a erasing of knowledge occurring, and even when we look at various timelines, there will be evidence to suggest that even the timelines are probably out by even 1,000 years, which changes a lot. It really does.
So when you say out by 1,000 years, we're kind of in the year 1022 as opposed to 2022.
Yes, yeah, kind of along that line.
1,000 years went missing around 900 or something, and yeah.
So that's interesting as well. But I think when people start looking into it, if they do that, there are too many questions that come up there, and that should let the mind go a little bit wild as to various possibilities. But I definitely don't buy that we're the most advanced that we've ever been. I think some of the people in control now would like to think that they can get to a stage where we're more advanced, and this is why we're looking at all the various nanotechnology and chipping and trying to integrate your brain with chips and integrating with AI and stuff like that, which honestly scares the heck out of me because I don't like the idea of that. Some might argue maybe these mRNA shots are kind of a beginning process of that, because when you look at nanotechnology nanotechnology is realistically, it's robot cells. And so if we're injecting robot cells into our body, do we really know the impact of that, how it integrates with our own biology and what the outcome of that is? And these are all questions that should be asked, and they seem to be discouraged, and people are censored when they do ask them.
Yeah, yeah. There was a movie I went to see with my son, I'd say about a decade ago now or thereabouts, and it was to do with Spider-Man, and it was just your usual Marvel type, beat the crap out of everything, blow things up, and get the girl type of shit. But there was a character in it that had this black goo. And it was as if disclosure was coming out through this movie to anyone that was watching, that there was this phenomenon of black goo. And it's from outer space, and it's sentient. It has a consciousness, and it exists. And it can morph onto or into and graft itself onto anything, including inside you. And I'm like, is this sci-fi, or is this, like, again, soft disclosure? Hollywood has a lot to answer for. And if you look at the talks by there was a couple of guys there, Jordan Maxwell. If you look at some of his old talks, he talks about the origins of Hollywood and stuff. There's a lot to sort of question there. So I would regard myself as a walking question mark. Question everything, challenge everything, question everything, and in a good way, not to be negative, not to be critical, not to be cynical, although those are the risks that you can fall into, those being a cynic, and through honest and genuine skepticism. And I would have encouraged all my children to be the same, including me. And they took me up on that one, and they questioned me and they challenged me, and I encouraged that. It makes parenting rather a difficult challenge, but when they get older, it might stand them in good stead for being decent human beings, as a consequence. So I feel the need to lighten things up a bit. You got any decent jokes? We've got the Menscape podcast tomorrow, and we've reduced it now to just one a month. And I used to ask at the end of the Menscape podcast, does anyone have any jokes? And I got accused of having these pretty awful dad jokes. So I'm more than happy to outsource the jokes to anybody else. And if nobody comes up with one, then you have to suffer one of mine.
The trouble for me is remembering the jokes. Yeah.
The only one that comes to mind is, what do you call a fella with a spade on his head?
What's that?
Doug.
Doug.
And what do you call a fella with no spade?
Okay.
Douglas. Anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah.
We get some good jokes for the next one. So, where can people find you?
They can find me physical location, Ennis, County Clare, Ireland. Online, 2 websites, fnclinic.ie or Rocker Clinic. That's my last name, Rocker, ROCKER, clinic.com. Loads of information there. Facebook, Functional Naturopathic Clinic. There should be some info there. Those are the main sources there. And like I said, myself, I'm dealing with the functional integrative medicine, blood chemistry. We do rehab therapy here, massage, spinal realignments, acupuncture, some of the older modalities like cupping and using essential oils. We're getting into more frequency type therapies as well. Plus all the other ones we mentioned earlier here in the clinic. So it's got a good one-stop shop here. In terms of other things, red light rooms, so dealing with light frequencies, in full spectrum infrared saunas as well, which can be really good for helping people detox or just simply relax, work on inflammatory issues and conditions. So quite a lot to offer here for anybody that's looking to optimize their health and their well-being. Yeah.
I read somewhere about a future where we have machines that we can tell it what to make, and it'll make the food that we want for dinner. And then sort of labs where you have med beds, where if you've got any physical ailment whatsoever, you can just get healing from this. Is this a stretch of the imagination, or is there realistically some future in these advanced technologies?
Well, it is actually a reality, because they actually have various devices right now and prototypes. The med bed things are a reality, and there are various frequency devices out there that do have very interesting impacts on people. Now, there's a lot of garbage devices out there as well. When you're dealing with frequent devices, it has to be able to initiate a positive effect on the cell. If it doesn't do that, then you're wasting your money. But yes, those old things that we used to see in Star Trek with the tricorders and that, well, there are plenty of devices right now that you can scan your system that can tell of imbalances and help you to understand, what you can do to help treat a person or adjust their lifestyle and diet accordingly. So, yeah, all this stuff is becoming a reality right now, which is exciting. But it also brings up a whole list of new questions about us and our reality as well. So this is something I could talk for the next 3 hours on. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So all that remains for me to say is, again, thanks for sponsoring the Menscape The Podcast over the last few months. Thanks for being the second guest, the only one to come back so far anyway. Hopefully there'll be more. And thanks for being a guest on September 2022's Menscape The Podcast. Richard Rocco, the Functional Naturopathic Clinic.
Thank you very much. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Menscape, the podcast with Carl.J. Ashley.